what I'm trying to say now, is the limited time really doesn't allow me to elaborate. But the bottom line is that we can read the history of capitalist cooptation in terms of struggles, in terms of constitutions of capitalist commons. And why is it important to say this? It's just scholastics? No, it's because we are now in a moment, I think, in which a new phase of potential cooptation and crafting of capitalist commons is being deployed. Just mention the environment, on the question of the environment, for example. If you look at the debate around sustainability, sustainable development, climate change, there is really the tension there to make deals on the question of our common future, our common planet, our common atmosphere, but linking all those commonality to the priority of capitalist accumulation, as it were the productivity deals, as it were other instances. The same thing in terms of the discussion of finance. The discussion of finance, again, is our finance, our economy, our fight against poverty linked to a new phase of financialization, nationalization of banks, etc. So, and I finish here, the point I'm really making is I think it's important to look at the history that we learn from our tradition in terms of commons and see how that maps to the concept of commons for moving from now forward in the kind of our intervention.
Okay, I'm Roger from Bristol Radical History Group. Obviously I'm from Britain. So when George asked me to come onto this panel to talk about the crisis, I thought, oh God, I'm going to have to read a lot about hedge funds or something. But so I did, and I would recommend, I'm not going to talk about it now, but what I would recommend is if you really want a good article to look at the anatomy of the crisis to understand it, it's been part of a series of educational day schools in Britain. I would recommend the Alf Haven article, if you can find the magazine Alf Haven online, which talks about the anatomy of the crisis. It's very good, but I won't bore you with it now. What I wanted to do in a great tradition of Midnight Notes and other groups is rather than talking about what they're doing to us, I was going to talk about what we're doing to them. So I want to just cover a few things that have happened in the last exciting year in Britain in 2009. A lot of people have been talking about green shoots of recovery in the economy. It's sort of a big deal in the media, but what we're talking about here is maybe some green shoots appearing of class recomposition. So I just want to cover them very quickly. I'm not going to cover, there's all sorts of other struggles going on around gentrification, education, health, and I'm not going to touch them. We maybe can talk about them in a bit. What I'm going to concentrate on is a series of factory occupations and strikes which happened this year as a result of the crisis. And they showed some very interesting tendencies and new forms of struggle to deal with perhaps the effect that globalisation has had. And it's kind of the first time I think we've seen some of these things. I'll start in February. Lindsay Oil Refinery in the northeast of England was basically full of contract workers. And one of the companies who was the construction work there decided to make only about 60 or 70 workers redundant, it said, whilst trying to bring in contract labour from another company from Italy. And that caused a strike. And the way it was portrayed in the media immediately was it was British workers going out to protest about Italian workers being brought into Britain to take away their jobs. That was how it was characterised in the media. And this strike, and I'll leave it there, that's the media's position, but what actually happened was the strike actually broke into a series of wildcat strikes, which we probably haven't seen since the 70s, I would argue. So very interesting. Those strikes not only went from oil refinery to oil refinery around the country, they involved contract labour most of the time, and they also spread to nuclear power stations in Nottingham and Grangemouth and Scotland and other places. I think 11 oil refineries were affected by action, several nuclear power stations as well. And what happened fairly quickly was that there was a struggle about the representation of those strikes. As I said, the media were portraying it as a kind of nationalist struggle, British jobs, British workers, which happens to be the slogan of the Labour Party in the 70s, is also the slogan of the current Prime Minister, and is also the slogan, interestingly, of course, the fascist party, the British National Party, which has gained an awful lot of electoral support recently. In fact, the British National Party tried to get involved in those disputes as well. But when it became clear, when we actually got to the bottom of what was going on, when you talked to the workers who were involved, they were very clear in their meetings and started to say, this is not a struggle around, foreign workers. This is a struggle around precarity. It's basically around precariousness as a subcontract worker. That strike was successful. It actually forced the companies who were employing the contract agencies to re-employ the workers they already had. And obviously they were going for Italian workers because they were cheaper. So that's the first struggle. It was successful. And interestingly, on the picket lines and in this wildcat strike, the strikers themselves made it very clear, look, the Polish workers are with us. The various nationalities that are involved in contract work were also going on strike. And then in April, there was a company called Vistion, which is a company that Ford, the Ford company in Dagenham in East London is a huge factory. It's actually where I was born. And that factory, over the last few years, has obviously been breaking down its large-scale operations into kind of subcontract suppliers. One of those companies was called Vistion, and they decided to make redundancies as a direct result of the crisis. And there were about 600 workers who were going to lose their jobs at that plant. That workforce is very interesting. It crosses over many, many ethnic groups. It's a mixture of men and women, and they occupied their factory. In fact, 3 factories were occupied to protest against their redundancies and the shutting of those factories. In fact, at one place they actually kidnapped the receivers. You know what receivers are? People coming to liquidate things. They had to be caught in the factory when the occupation happened. They locked them in a skip for 2 days, I think, until they decided they didn't want to stay there anymore and they left. But those occupations in one area, one factory in Enfield, 100 workers actually occupied, it lasted 9 days, and there was a kind of partial victory there. And then in the summer, we had a very interesting one which united the climate camp people, the climate activists, with an industrial dispute. There was a factory called Vestas which produced turbine blades for wind turbines, and that had 400 workers and was basically went out of business. So the government didn't step in, and 16 workers occupied the factory in it's a little island called the Isle of Wight, just off south of England. And climate camp activists all went there. I won't comment on the political discussions that went on through those camps. Maybe we can talk about the camps that went on around the factory. I'll leave that till later, but I can tell you that there was significant discussions around class, climate, and the crisis. I'll leave that for now. I'm just going to jump in now and encourage my comrade over there. He's just going to give you 1 minute on the postal strike, which is ongoing at the moment.
1 minute, you'd be very lucky, Ross. Can you all hear me over there, comrades? Yeah, fine. I'm going to talk to you about this Communication Workers Union and the strike that's only just been pulled. It got pulled, I think, about a week and a half before we arrived here, which was on Monday. Communication Workers are CWU. Now, the Royal Mail is nationalised, as I suppose you know, it's a nationalised service. It employs about 800,000 people in the country. Now, because it's so big, and I expect you get the same in America, there's national terms and conditions, and there's localised agreements as well. Now, there's a lot of localised disputes going on at the moment, including in Bristol, but also in Butlins, Sheffield, Leeds, and places like that, where people are walking out over changes to routes, stuff like that, overtime payment. I mean, when change the routes, what they do is they lay one person off and his two mates have to pick up the slack. But the big one recently is a national dispute, and it all came out of the pensions. Once again, there's a big deficit in the pensions pots. Now, I understand the pensions, it's deferred wages. You put your wages in, you get them when you retire. But what happens is that they blag it on the sorry, I shouldn't say blag it, it's a London word. They lose it on the stock market, and then we pick it up. And of course, with the recent crisis, that's exactly what's happened with the pension. But the Labour government has stepped in, bless their cotton socks, and they've said, we pick up that bill. And what they mean by that is we pick up that bill with taxpayers' money. So it's a double whammy. We pay for it twice. But they'll only pick it up if the Royal Mail Service is partly privatised. Now, as anybody in Britain will tell you, before they privatise something, they rip it apart. They tear down the terms and conditions, and that's exactly what they're up to with the Royal Mail Service. like overtime rates I spoke about, but pay as well. The whole lot is up for grabs. And obviously the CW have come out. But I expect you all know about Thatcher's labour laws and how organised trade unions can't do secondary picketing and stuff like that. It's illegal, and the authorities can actually seize members' subs, sue you in a court of law. There's two things that have grown out in the last year in reflection to this. One is the National Shop Stewards Network, which is a rank and file movement. Shop stewards are people who actually do the negotiating work at a localised level in the factory, in the fields, in the hospitals, wherever it is. And basically it uses, I'm miles away, mate. It uses the media. But I also like to talk to you about the Bristol IWW. Now, I think you should hold this close to your hearts, because I know we've got a couple of comrades here from the IWW.